Hi, friend. Welcome back to the Renaissance English History Podcast. I am Heather, and I am delighted to have welcomed Sarah Gristwood back to my channel and podcast just this week to talk about the Tudors in love. It is love time, love day, and she's written this book called The Tudors in Love, all about the history of courtly love and how courtly love influenced the Tudors. Really, really interesting. A super good deep dive into that. Highly recommend it. So one of the things I do for YouTube channel members and patrons is have monthly author chats like this. I send out a Zoom link in advance and people come on. So you're actually seeing the recorded one of that. We had it live and people joined in and could ask questions, things like that. So if you would like to join in on these monthly author chats as well, why not either hit join this channel if you're watching this on YouTube to learn more, or go to patreon.com/englandcast. Whatever's easiest for you. You do it for about $1 an episode, podcast episode, $4 a month, and you get all kinds of extra mini casts and author chats and all kinds of extra fun stuff. So patreon.com/englandcast, or click join this channel to learn how to join live in our next month's author chat. All right, let's get started with this chat with Sarah Gristwood. Sarah Gristwood is an English journalist and author. She was born in Kent, grew up in Dover. She's written as a journalist for a number of British papers, including The Times, The Guardian, and The Telegraph. She's written historical biographies as well as fiction and contributed to television documentaries. Her historical biography, Arbella, England's Lost Queen, is about Lady Arbella Stuart, an English noblewoman who was considered a possible successor to Elizabeth I. We've talked about her on this channel. She also wrote the fabulous Game of Queens, all about queenship in the 16th century. Really loved that as well. So thank you to Sarah Gristwood for joining us, and I'm just going to turn it over to our talk. So what inspired you to look at the theme of courtly love? And your book kind of transcends the medieval ideas of courtly love and then how the Tudors interpreted that. So can you tell me, like, what was the inspiration for that?
I know. Well, I really hate to say this. Probably Vanessa Redgrave in the movie Camelot, heaven knows how many years ago. Basically, it was as if there was a missing piece. I've written a number of books about the Tudors, uh, in love, not in love, women and power. And it's as if there was a step we were missing. Something in their heads, a really dominant ideal in the way that just wasn't there in ours. And I can't remember what exactly first twigged me on that, as it were. I think I was thinking about, as we all do if we're interested in the Tudors, Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn. And what was the code that made sense of that? What made this king, long married man, declare himself the servant, the slave, to this woman, whose recommendations were personal rather than, political. Um, and similarly, I've written about Elizabeth I and about her courtiers and suitors. And if you look at a lot of it now, a lot of their behavior, you'd be inclined to think, get a grip, you know? But there was a missing step, and I came to realize that A, this ideal was it, and B, that it still affects us all today.
Mm, interesting. And so can you tell me, like, how you talk about the Tudors as being like this last dynasty that really believed in love and
Hmm. Yeah.
obsessed with love? How much of the Tudor view of courtly love was a real emotion? How much of it was like a strategic
Mm,
performance?
yeah, good question. Um, I suspect courtly love was always performative in a way, but that doesn't necessarily make it less powerful. I think, well, courtly love, born in the songs of the troubadours, really kicking off late 12th century, the court of Marie de Champagne, Eleanor of Aquitaine's daughter. And then it had already a huge number of absurdities. But guess what? It didn't go away. For centuries, it remained this kind of creed that held the imagination of aristocratic Europe in thrall. So, although it was performative, it was never altogether real. Certainly, in theory, it gave the woman the upper hand. In fact, I'd say it was in many ways a trap for her, as Anne Boleyn found.
Right.
But nonetheless, there was obviously some real emotion, some real aspiration there. So,
Mm.
and I think that's true, not least for the Tudors. I think Henry VIII is the first key figure here. You know, a man desperate. I'd say Henry VIII was in some ways, and I don't mean this kindly, the last of the great romantics. I think he was in love with love. It's just, it was this strange ideal that didn't actually make much provision for reality.
Right. And it actually just occurs to me that there might be some people who listen to this who aren't so familiar with courtly love. So I got
Absolutely.
into it
Yeah.
earlier. I should back up for a second.
No, let's back up. As I
Yeah.
say, okay, we're late 12th century, the court of Marie de Champagne, where this great lady requests, orders a poet, Chrétien de Troyes, to write down the story for the first time of Lancelot and Guinevere,
Mhm.
King Arthur's Guinevere and Lancelot. And of course, it's become an absolute staple now. I mean, look at Camelot, the musical. Look at a great many other versions as well. But at the time, it was pretty weird. What you've got here, you've got King Arthur's wife in love with, forgive me, having it off with King Arthur, if that's American usage. And I'm sure you can guess, with King Arthur's best friend. And yet, at a time when in real life, church and state would have absolutely slammed them, condemned them, we're meant to honor them for the strength of their passion. I mean, there's all sorts of strange things in Chrétien's Lancelot. He finds a comb, you know, hair comb, that Guinevere has been dropped by the road with a few strands of her hair caught in it. And he starts to worship it as if it was a holy relic. When he leaves the door of her bedroom, he genuflects as if he were leaving a holy shrine. I
Mhm.
mean, today we would urge him to seek professional help and
Right.
quickly, but nonetheless, this idea came in like a tiger and it didn't let its claws slip.
And
So,
there's all oh,
yeah,
sorry, go
yeah,
ahead. No.
over the next centuries, it didn't go away. I mean, then later at Marie de Champagne's court, um, a monk wrote a version of the actual rules of courtly love, somewhat satirical maybe, but over the next centuries, you know, you'd get the church slamming it, you'd get Christine de Pisa from another, from a feminist point of view, proto-feminist, also criticizing it. But you'd get writers like Dante, Boccaccio, Chaucer, all making use of it. The great medieval bestseller was the Roman de la Rose, which absolutely explores it. Somehow it just stuck there in literature, which meant in life to some degree.
Right. I wonder there's also the idea that the woman is always out of reach, right? That it,
Mm,
so we should talk
yeah.
about like was this
Well,
courtly love ever
yeah.
consummated? Did it ever
Yeah.
become like a true thing?
No, no, quite. The ideal, the central image of courtly love, and it's one that comes to us through the Victorian revival more than through medieval, is a knight kneeling at the feet of a beautiful lady. The lady is theoretically unobtainable. Courtly love terms, she's usually already, like Guinevere, already married to someone else of higher status. Uh, that was always the big question, to what degree she really was unobtainable. I mean, Guinevere wasn't unobtainable to Lancelot, even though they were, honored as this honorable pair. Um, Over the centuries, that would go on being the great question. I mean, the woman was meant to be of higher rank, married, saying no, no, until maybe in the end she said yes, yes. Uh, I mentioned that manual, The Rules of Courtly Love. Well, there's a bit in there where the monk who's writing it says that uh, the the lover may enjoy the embraces of his lady naked in a bed, and yet their love may be accounted honourable if the final solace is denied to them. And I think we
Gotcha.
can all guess what the final solace is meant to be.
So they got very
So
specific.
yeah, exactly. It's a much politer way of saying the kind of high school first base, second base, you know?
Right. Gotcha. My question then is also like about what did people get, like, this gets into gender
Mm.
role psychology and all of this kind of like
Yeah.
my brain starts to hurt, but like what do people get
What do
out
they
of this
get out of
idea
it?
of like, so I can
Yeah.
understand potentially a woman being worshipped and the
Yeah.
woman has this, maybe it puts women on it,
Yeah.
but they weren't really and men with like
Yeah.
this hunting thing, like
Yeah.
what do people get out of this idea of courtly love?
Yeah. Well, I think we have to look there at the circumstances, the world in which this was conceived. So we're looking at the time of the Crusades. We're looking at the world of the medieval castle, which was massively male. You'd have a lot of men and mostly young men, high testosterone levels. You'd have very, very few women. Even all the jobs, like kitchen jobs that we think of today as mostly female, would have been done by men. And particularly with a lot of the lord and a lot of the knights away on crusade, there'd be this group of young men with nowhere to go emotionally, basically. So it probably was helpful for the women who were in fact would have been sold off into marriage, by their male relatives without a thought for their own interests or wishes. But it may also have worked for the men
Hmm. Gotcha.
because these young men were supposed to worship the noble, honourable lady, but emphasis on the word lady. There
Mm.
is a line in that manual for courtly love that says, yes, the knight, the lover, should do everything to please his noble mistress. But if his fancy chances to light on a woman of the lower classes, quote, a measure of force may be necessary. Well, not very courtly to our eyes, is it?
No. And so that's starting in like the 12th, 13th century
Mhm.
in the Crusades. How did that change, or did it by the time of the Tudors?
Yes, it did, but just before the Tudors, there'd been a great revival. I mean, courtly love ebbed and flowed. After the original kind of enthusiasm, it may have faded away a bit. The church weighed in against it. And then, as I said, people like proto-feminists like Christine de Pizan said, well, hey, excuse me, are women really getting a good deal here? Is this really realistic? Is it really virtuous? But the 15th century, the end of the Middle Ages, did see a revival. I mean, all the early literature of courtly love imagined Marie de Champagne and her ladies adjudicating at actual real life courts of love, debating knotty points, etiquette and emotion. No, they almost certainly didn't exist in the 12th century. But guess what? In the early 15th century, in France, they were revived in reality as a kind of court game. It's as if, with the waning of the Middle Ages, with the coming of a new world, people kind of groped for the old one again.
Sure. And we see that's a very human thing, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it is. Yeah, yeah. And
And
certainly, sorry, at the dawn of the Tudor age, you can absolutely see this big, in England, resurgence of interest, particularly in the Arthurian legends with which, courtly love was so bound up. I mean,
was that
now,
the first book that
yeah,
Caxton printed
yep,
was yeah.
that's it. No, exactly. You're quite right. Was the mort d'Arthur Mallory in exactly the year of the Battle of Bosworth, and of course Henry VII absolutely jumped on this bandwagon because he needed some kind of credibility for his rather dubious Tudor dynasty.
Right. And then thinking about Henry VIII, and
Mhm.
I was thinking about the whole with the women being unavailable and
Mm,
the Henry and Anne, of course, but then Anne becomes available. And then, so how do you think courtly
yes.
love
Yeah.
shifted their relationship and Henry's obsession with courtly love? And how did
Yeah.
talk
Well,
about
I
that?
think I think in many ways it explains the story of Henry and Anne as nothing else can do. Because if you look at the letters that Henry wrote to Anne early in their courtship, they are absolutely, from a servant adoring his noble mistress, which is totally courtly love. I mean, in fact, obviously in the real world, he was the king and she was a comparatively unimportant lady. But in this courtly world, she could be adored. And a big thing about in courtly love was nobility of worth, not birth. So the fact that he could present Anne, in his own mind at least, as this kind of epitome of learning and virtue, because of course she was leading him towards a different way of thinking, a different strand of faith, that was absolutely key. But later, when they were married, that's where the real cracks in the courtly love theory uh, start to show. Because I mean, in the early days of his reign, Henry had talked in those terms about Catherine of Aragon, had ridden in the joust, with her initials embroidered on his saddle cloths. He was Sir Loyal Heart and loyal to Catherine of Aragon. But courtly love was never really equipped to go much past the the church gates, the marriage bed.
Kind of like a fairy tale that
Yeah,
ends like
exactly,
happily ever after. And it's like, okay, well, then what
exactly.
happens?
Yeah, exactly that. In
Yeah.
theory, it put the woman on a pedestal, but there's not much you can do on a pedestal except fall off it, you know?
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
that's pretty much what happened to Anne. And then, of course, the kind of courtly play that she'd learnt in France, this gay, this cultivated court she kept around her, these young men like, Wyatt and Norris and so on, making not terribly serious, adoring comments to her, could be used as weapons against her.
Right. And then just thinking about her, and you mentioned Christine de Pizan and those
Yeah.
proto-feminist, and Anne having been raised probably with exposure to can we talk about, like, Anne's perception of courtly love? And you kind of hinted at it there with the court that she was building,
Yeah.
versus Henry's view of court love and how they
Yeah.
might have clashed.
Yes. Well, in a sense, of course, we know more about Henry's because we have his letters and because he was the king. Uh, and his story didn't end in 1536 with Anne's death. We know far more about his thinking. We have, in a way, singularly few bits of real evidence about Anne. But yes, indeed, she'd grown up at the courts first of Margaret of Austria and then the court of France. it does seem very definite that she learned a lot of these charming, fascinating games and how to play them. And that's probably what made her a star and a quarry at the English court. And that's probably a lot of what attracted Henry. But it does sound as though, insofar as we can judge, she played the game, she knew it was her power base, but she didn't know when to stop playing, that the rules were different for a wife. Or, to put it another way, to look at it another way, she had no option but to go on playing. Because after all, she didn't have a powerful European royal family at her back. She didn't really represent a great alliance or.
Yeah.
So in a way, she staked her all on courtly love, but maybe she had to.
Yeah. And then I also wonder, just thinking about, you said some of these people who took a different, like Christina Pizan and
Yeah.
Anne, a lot of times people talk about Anne being a feminist, which
Mm,
that can be debated, modern terms on people who, but
true.
like, do you think that Anne would have, do you think that uh, this is getting way
Mhm.
sidetracked, but do
Mhm.
you think that she would have really liked the idea of courtly love, or would she have been
Oh,
influenced by
yes.
some of these negativities potentially, or feminist
No,
viewpoints?
no, I think she'd have liked it because after all, it did for a while give her a staggering and almost unprecedented rise.
Gotcha.
So no, I think she would have liked it. I think she liked it a bit too much.
Okay. So then moving on to her daughter,
Mm,
and some of the flirtations that Elizabeth was
mhm,
famous for. Can you
mm.
talk about how
Yeah.
that
Well,
was, yeah,
yeah. Well, you see, I think that's all. We're almost flipping the coin here, which is what's so interesting. I think that courtly love was, a lure and then finally a trap for Anne. But I think Elizabeth absolutely made use of it because, well, we think of her now as the Virgin Queen, long and successful solo reign, all the rest of it. But we forget a bit that when she came to the throne, everyone absolutely expected that she had to marry. No other options. When it began to become clear that she wasn't going to, there needed to be kind of a language for this, a code for this unprecedented solo female monarchy. Because remember, England hadn't had a queen until her sister Mary. Mary married. All those discussions about how much power her husband had in England. But with Elizabeth, both, you might say, professionally, politically, and personally, I think courtly love absolutely worked for her, and she absolutely played it. Because again, it was a court very largely composed of men, except for the women, directly in Elizabeth's own chamber. And of course, men like Robert Dudley seriously hoped at first to marry her. But again, when it became clear that wasn't going to happen, Elizabeth had to somehow keep them still on the string. And they had to find a way of still being around her, still seeming, on their knees in this posture of devotion for decades without looking ridiculous. Guess what? Courtly love, the ideal of courtly love, makes sense of it all. Yeah.
and
Whether
then
or not you 100% believe it, it's the code, it's the game you can play.
and do you think there was a difference in how her various courtiers viewed her and courtly love, people like Essex, in the later years compared to
Yes,
somebody
indeed.
like Dudley?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. No, I think in the early years, well, Dudley did have real hopes of marrying her and real, almost familial affection for her, I think. Someone like Christopher Hatton, yeah, and Raleigh, in many ways, yes, played this game as a game. Essex, it's interesting, isn't it? Because Essex is where it all goes sour. It
Wrong. Yeah.
was, yeah, the last years of it. And it's as if he's still talking the talk that, oh, that he, hopes in his letters, hopes to conquer her resisting will, that her windows will be the lodestars that'll guide his ships home. But he's absolutely not walking the walk. It's as if then courtly love reached its kind of apogee, its tipping point, as it were, and it was all downhill from there.
Gotcha. I have one final question, and then Simone, also, if you have any questions or want to hop in, please
Sure.
feel free to chat them or unmute yourself. My question is, it is love season right now, and that's why I'm
Huh?
talking to you about this.
Yep.
But how do you think that courtly love, and then the Tudor interpretation of courtly love, and then the Victorian interpretation of the Tudor interpretation of the medieval, how did all of that come to us, and how do we
Oh,
it influence
yeah.
us?
I think it does. I think it did, and it does. I think it came to us chiefly because, I mean, after all, most people don't know much about 12th century history, through the Victorians and Edwardians, who had this massive revival of it. But we've all sort of got those pictures in our heads, the kind of knight kneeling in front of the, and it goes on right to one example I can think of. I don't, it may not, sorry, forgive me, this may not be comprehensible in America, but when I was growing up in England, there was an advert for a brand of chocolates. It had a lover leaping off a ship, swimming through dangerous waters, climbing her to bring his lady love her desire. Now, in fact, it was a rather sickly box of chocolates, but that's bang on courtly love stuff. We can see it in so many old pops. We can, uh, I'll spare
I'm
you.
thinking romantic comedies
Yeah,
and like Bridget
totally.
Jones
Yeah.
and
Well, I won't try and hum it to you, but if you've got in your head those chords, Giorgio Moroder, Electric Dreams, I only saw her for a while. That's absolute courtly
Gotcha.
love. And some of the feminists of the Germaine Greer era, she for one, did write about it and write about its dangers. So I think in a way, Valentine's Day reflects what you could say the benign side of courtly love. The imagery was big on hearts and flowers and May Day and spring and lovely. But dig a bit further down and I'm not so sure.
Yes, for sure. Very good. All right. Well, we've come to our half an hour. I do appreciate you taking the
Mhm.
time, and your book, The Tudors in Love, is such a good book to read at this
Thank
time
you.
here. And Simone, I'm guessing you don't have anything to share, but thank you for hopping on too, Simone. And thank you, Sarah Gristwood, for being here.
Thank you.
And it's always a joy to see you and to speak to you. And thank you so much for your work. And Game of Queens is also an amazing book, which I talked to you about when it first
Great.
came out 8 years ago.
Yeah,
So,
indeed. Yes,
I
I remember.
all right.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Have a good one.
Thank you. Okay. Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye. All right, I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. Sarah Gristwood, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your time and your expertise. Again, if you would like to be part of these author chats live as they happen, you can either click join this channel right now if you are watching on YouTube, and that'll give you all of the details, or you can go to patreon.com/englandcast to see how you can support there. Whatever is easiest for you. All right, thank you so much for being here. Remember, you are deeply loved. I'm so glad that I share the planet with you. I'll be back very soon. Don't forget to drink your water. Bye-bye, friend.